Hey everyone, Paul here, and this is Chapter 3 of Mitchell Williams and his gang of misfit junkrats. The city of Brass is in trouble, and its leader, Lord Blake Williams, has got to find a certain treasure before the opposing realm of Lantec will subside. They're threatening to attack in 3 days, so we're on a time crunch. Mitchell has met a girl named Jenny who escaped from Lantec, and they are on their way to go see Lord Blake Williams and talk to him about the treasure. And Tempest, who is Mitchell's little sister and Lord Blake Williams' daughter, has taken interest in a young boy who is kind of a street rat and is doing favors for her in exchange for food. Chapter 3. Blake. Lord Blake Williams sat alone in his study. Before him, a stack of papers rested, neatly aligned, and first and foremost was a letter he had penned to King Mathis, a plea to help his desperate situation. He hadn't even tried to return to his bed. There was no doubt in his mind that he would have tossed and turned until Brian, his servant, came to wake him. It had been, an hour and a half since DeSanders had come and gone? And since then, Blake relived the experience 1,000 times in his head. He was sure he had every word that had been said memorized. He was of the mind that it was not the unlearned who were foolish, for many learned men had made foolish decisions. But even the unlearned could be wise if they study the facts and know the consequences of their choices. There were choices to be made, and he could make any one of them, knowing full well the support of the city would be with him. He could do the obvious, scour the city until the treasure was found and return it to DeSanders on bended knee. There was no repercussion for that, aside from a thief being handed the god's judgment. His city would be safe, his people still alive, and his reputation and relations with Lantec intact. He could live with that, and his people would respect him. After all, they are still here even after all the wrong decisions I've made in the past. This might be just another mark in my tally of bad decisions. Another option would be to claim ignorance. He was ignorant about this matter after all. He would send an envoy to Lantec explaining that he couldn't possibly locate his treasure, especially if someone was trying to hide it. He would then invite the Lord of Lantec to peacefully search the city from top to bottom, allowing him no boundaries or blockades as he searched. Once he was satisfied that the treasure was not there, or, upon finding it, DeSanders would leave, and no blood would be shed. But ignorance wasn't his style. DeSanders had already mocked him openly about having a tight grasp on the city. Taking this route would further loosen the grip and lessen the faith his people had in him. It would make him look weak. "I am not weak," he said aloud. It was sort of a family motto. In spite of everything that has happened to us, is happening, or will happen, I will be strong and persevere. He had persevered. He had been strong. His people stood by him because of that strength. Thirdly, he could stand strong. As peacefully as possible, he could tell DeSanders that there is no reason for an assault on his city, that his brass knights would begin an investigation on the matter and return their findings, and that if he allowed something so precious to be taken from him, he was the one losing grip on his city. He would say it was DeSanders' own vexing fault, and he would have to figure it out by himself. He would tell DeSanders that if an attack were to happen, he would get King Mathis involved to settle the dispute. And because it was sparked by one trivial theft, Mathis would lay fault on DeSanders for his actions. If only, Blake thought. There were too many unlikely and uncontrollable events that could happen, that he would be unable to conduct them all into place. Time was an issue. DeSanders had given Blake 3 days. For that reason, a message to King Mathis, though made instantaneously through telegraph, would not see action until troops could be shipped to the city of Brass from Citrocity, where the palace rested. And because of the war between the Pandai, those same troops would have to travel much slower and through Lantic itself on their way there. Perhaps if this had happened a single week from now, when the last of the bridges, Skybridge 10, was completed, he would get his troops in time via Pandus 2 and have enough strength to quell Dysanders before he attacked. Blake threw his pen down, the ink spotted tip sending a splash of blackness across the report he was supposed to be signing. The most vexing evidence was right in front of him. The reports of coal shortages throughout the city, even the burning of lumber, had now worsened to the point where the city of Brass had no fuel for anything. The factories would be down today. His castle had already stopped producing heat, and nothing from the mech hall could be powered. In a nutshell, his entire city was shut down until Skybridge 10 was completed. It seemed Dysanders had been planning this attack for months, maybe even years, cutting down most of the coal shipments coming into the city of Brass by emptying the trains before they could make it there, imposing his brass tax, which depleted his resources and limited the amount of revenue to the city, and finally, calling him out last night and threatening the city. The city of Brass was in prime condition to be taken over, and what could he do? Who could he turn to? Lastly, he thought of his wife, Layla Williams, though she was never last in his mind. His heart broke then, realizing that this man had taken everything from him, and a tear rolled off his nose and onto his reports. In a shuddering breath, he recited, "In spite of everything that has happened to us, is happening, or will happen, I will be strong and persevere. I will be strong." This day was Torben's birthday. His son was becoming a man today. And would it be said that on the day his youngest son became a man, that his father faltered and gave in to his threatening neighbor? No. Today I will be strong. Today, even though all is bleak, I will show my people the meaning of strength. A knock sounded at the door, and Brian pushed his way inside. Though his servant would never know, Blake covered the tear-spotted report with his hand. "Master Brian," he said, "is it time to arise already?" "It is, my lord," Brian responded, carrying a copper tray topped with mango, white cheese, and wild nuts. "I looked for you in your bedroom and didn't see you, so I came looking." "I was unable to sleep," Blake said. "Naturally," Brian said, nodding. "I don't think anyone in the entire city could have gone back to sleep after what happened. The entire servants' quarters were ablaze with talk, and probably still are, those of us who don't have to work until later." "And what are they saying?" Brian took a deep breath. The servants see things as they are. They're not bogged down by political positionings or the blinders of realm and duty. They see the embellished and unaffected interaction between one man and another. In this case, between you and Lord Carlos Dysanders. "And what is that?" Blake asked. "What is my political position blinding me from seeing?" The fact of the matter is that you have a very difficult decision on your hands. But it is one man's decision nonetheless. That which you decide to do will shape the rest of our lives and the lives of your family, my lord. We are at your mercy, and this decision could have a terrible outcome, or a beautiful one. The choice is yours." "I wish it were that easy," Blake said, shaking his head. "I wish it were laid before me as two options, terrible and beautiful, and all I had to do was pick up the one, and everything was done." Brian chuckled to himself. "Apologies, my lord. Nothing is ever that easy. I would urge you, however, to try and strip away all the embellishments, unwrap the situation from everything in the past, and see it from your future self." "My future self?" "Yes," Brian said. "See the man who looks back on this decision and says, 'Yes, I did the right thing.' Then, perhaps, you can make the hard choice. Brian motioned to the food that lay before him, but Blake waved it away. I don't think I can eat at a time like this, Blake said. Your mother would tell you otherwise, answered Brian. She would say that it is in times like these that a man needs sustenance more than ever. Perhaps I should go retrieve her. No, Brian, curse you. I'll eat. Just don't get my mother involved. Brian bowed. Sir Wilton Bates has recently been relieved of his post at the portcullis, and wishes to give his report of your daughter, Tempest, my lord. Send him in, said Blake, now chewing a small loaf of buttered sweetbread. And try to lessen the talk of the servants. They've had their concerns heard now. Perhaps they can focus on work. Yes, my lord. One more thing, Blake said, grabbing the sheet of paper he had been writing earlier. This is a letter to King Mathis. Telegraph this to his cabinet for me. With that, Brian nodded and left. A short time later, Wilton Bates entered. His armor, which had been polished since last Blake had seen, consisted of a steel cap with a nose guard, copper breastplate and mail, and iron loins, bracers, and greaves. His steel cap was a gift from King Mathis himself, to honor Wilton for his service in the war. Wilton honorably served under Blake as part of the Williams 2nd Battalion, and Blake had learned to love the man like a brother. Upon Blake's promotion to Lord, Wilton followed and served under him since the beginning. He was starting to show signs of age now, unable to keep up with the younger knights in the city of Brass and its outlying villages. His hair, though it was still under the steel cap, was growing wider every day. He talked about his muscles aching and losing feeling in his toes if he stood too long. He held the railing of any staircase regardless of its length and height. Blake was afraid that this old, trustworthy friend would soon need to retire, and Blake would miss him more than anyone. My lord, he began. Yes, Wilton. Sir Wilton, whatever you call yourself nowadays. Come in, please sit. Let me get you some juice. He reached over to his own goblet, not having taken a drink yet, and passed it to Wilton. Brian says you've just finished duty. Overnight shift? A man as seasoned as you should be able to pick better hours than that. I'll speak to Naren about it. Wilton accepted his lord's offer and sipped at the breakfast juice. It was honey, lemon, and burnberry. Not necessary, Lord Williams. I chose that shift myself. The missus and I find it most difficult to keep our marriage strong if we have to spend it together. They shared a laugh. It felt good, sort of lighter from the pressure and stress of the morning. How is Garina? Is life at home bearable? Wilton gave a non-committal shrug. We struggle with the shortages, same as everyone. There's only so much wood to burn until we have to tear down our own homes to keep warm. And I am sorry about that. I have 3 trains docked at Brumont on Pandas 2 waiting for the skybridge to open. We'll have all the food and coal we need to get this city running again. The good news is that these trains won't have been picked over by Landtech before they get to us. That will be most welcome, my lord, as long as the city is still intact. Of course it will still be intact, Blake said. I'll guide us safely through this Dysanders situation. He can bark all he wants, but his noise will not harm us. So, you have a plan? Said Wilton. What are you going to do? Honestly, I haven't decided what to do yet, but we've faced threats like this before, and with enough resistance, Dysanders will back down. Beg your pardon, my lord, said Wilton, but there is something different about this threat. I can't really identify the reason, but it seems Dysanders has acted harshly. I mean, driving here at such an early hour? There were so many other ways to contact you. I think he's incredibly desperate, and desperate men do dangerous things. So, you will try to negotiate then? As much as I can, yes. And when that fails, what happens when Dysanders fulfills his promise and brings his military? Blake sighed. I don't know, Wilton. I guess I'm hoping it doesn't come to that. My lord, I'm old, but I'm not blind. We are in the direst circumstances. Lantec has strangled us for months. We have no access to supplies, and no coal means we cannot power defenses if Lantec attacks. That is the very reason I cannot allow an attack. I must keep these people safe. Perhaps in a few months we could hold off an attack. Wilton fixed his stare on his lord. What I see in this is more than just a treasure lost. He will take the city. He will take your realm. And to solidify his military victory, he will kill you and your family. We cannot roll over on this. Blake let the words fall. There were still so many risks to any decision he could make. You came to see me about my daughter? What news do you have? Well, she did it again, and the kitchens are furious, Wilton related. What did she take this time? Wilton unfolded a piece of paper and read over it quickly. A stem of white grapes, 3 apples, a cherry tart, a slice of honey bread, 3 glazed rolls, and a wedge of cheese. He handed it over to Blake so that he could inspect it closer. The list wasn't long. It had been much longer before, but Blake still shook his head and put the piece of paper in a drawer where he kept the others. It had happened 2 or 3 times each week since her mother had been taken. Tempest would sneak into the kitchens and swipe a bag full of sweets and head out the door. At first, the kitchens noticed but paid no mind to it. Food was still in abundance, and what she took counted as next to nothing. Now, however, with such shortages in food, everything was measured. Each cook would have only so much to work with and the entire castle to feed. Every time she took food, at least one in the castle would go hungry, and Blake's honor wouldn't allow another to go hungry before him. Tonight he would have to skip another dinner to balance the kitchen's inventory. And how much of this did she actually eat? It's hard to say, answered Wilton. She was chewing something as she passed me, but as she was out in the square, she ate nothing. She gave her leather bag to the same boy as usual, and he returned an empty one of the same make. After chatting for a while, he split off from her, and she came back inside. The boy's name is Jonas, Blake related. One of my personal guards followed him last time he showed up. The boy lives with 6 other boys in an abandoned workshop, Taylor Smith's old place, before he was transferred to the mech hall. Wilton nodded. You don't say. Yes. Doubtless, the boy's been taking the food back to the workshop and splitting it among his comrades. They eat better than most in the city, I suppose. This Jonas, then, is taking advantage of Tempest's graciousness and obtaining food without working for it, Blake finished. It was dishonorable, but how severe was the crime? He must also take into consideration that this criminal was only a boy. His rights and lack of schooling must be a factor in his eagerness to break the law for food. And then there was Tempest. She no doubt believed what she was doing was right and commendable, but she misunderstood the effects of her stealing on those around her. Blake would not tell her directly that she must stop. Tempest would take that as an insult to her judgment, and she was such a fiery young girl. This wasn't even the biggest problem Blake was having with his youngest daughter. On a weekly basis, he would sit her down with tutors and discuss Tempest's work and progress. They would shake their heads and complain that though she had skill and memory and could recite any lesson given to her in the past year, she did not utilize that knowledge. For instance, after carefully crafting an etiquette lesson by Bula Dritz on the proper way to hail a foreign lord or lady, Tempest would still slap the lord of the quarry on the back and say, "Hiya, Beardy!" Bula Dritz was on the verge of a meltdown, and the rest of the tutors seemed equally frustrated. Something must be done with that girl. An outlet or a new life imposed, because the way things were going, she'd drive the entire teaching staff out the door. As if echoing his thoughts, Wilton said, "My lord, Lady Tempest is a unique soul. If all men were like her, including this Jonas boy, there would be no famine, no hunger. It's just that her actions to the realm are seen without their consequences. You mustn't think this has to do with your parenting. Even before the loss of your dear wife, Lady Williams, she was quick to act, though now it seems much too quick. What shall be done about this? Shall we forbid contact with the boy? Lock the Lady Tempest into the castle with only leave under supervision?" "I wouldn't go that far," answered Blake. "Not yet, anyway. I'd like to see this boy Jonas. See that he attends the private court today, and we'll speak to him about this. He's just a boy, and I'll have to see what the Code of Honor says about such a situation." "As you command, my lord. Should the Lady Tempest be present?" "No," Blake said curtly. "There's nothing more that could shake her pride and lose my trust than to see me meddling in her personal affairs. She is the lady of the Copper Castle now that her mother is gone, and she has certain rights to privacy." Wilton nodded and stood. "You'd better eat, my lord, if you intend to skip another dinner on your daughter's behalf." Blake smiled and nodded. "I guess I'd better." Once Wilton closed the door, Blake buried his head in his hands. "Layla," he thought, "what am I supposed to do without you?" In his mind's eye, he saw her, standing atop Twisted Tower, her golden dress streaming in the wind and the light of the sunset. She was older than when they had met, but no less beautiful. She smiled at him, and he felt the feelings stir in his stomach of love and adventure. She was... perfect wasn't the word. She was never perfect. But there was never a day that went by that Lord Blake Williams didn't think of his beloved wife, who was no longer his. She had left him. The tears came. Will they ever end? He supposed not.